Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to this presentation by Promore Pharma in connection with the company's report for the second quarter of 2021. The company will today be represented by CEO Jonas Ekblom and CFO Erik Magnusson. And as for myself, my name is Alf Riple. I work for Västra Hamnen Corporate Finance and I will be your moderator for today. We will start with a presentation by the company, and after that we will have a Q&A session. You are invited to ask questions by writing them either on the right side of your screen or on the bottom of your screen. There will be a field called questions. It may be indicated with a talk bubble. You can write your questions there and we will read them out, and Jonas and Erik will answer. So all that remains for me to say is that this session will be recorded, and that the recording later on will be found on Promore Pharma's homepage and on Västra Hamnen's channel on YouTube. So with that, I'll leave the word to you, Jonas.
Thank you very much, Alf. It's a pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to present the interim financial statement for the second quarter. We will start with a short review of the company and its activities, and then I will turn it over to my colleague Erik Magnusson to describe our financial position. So just to recap, there we go. I apologize for that. So we're a small biopharmaceutical company. We are dedicated to developing products for advanced wound care. We have two projects. These projects are based on human peptides. These are two first-in-category products, so we're addressing two marketplaces where there today are no prescription pharmaceuticals. We work with Ensereptide, which is in phase 2, where we have a focus on prevention of scarring on the skin. There are, in our estimation, 30 million plus relevant procedures that we think a future product could address. And we're working with Ropocamptide, that is for aimed as a product for treatment of venous leg ulcers, which is the most common type of hard to heal wounds on the legs. And we are primarily focusing on patients with large wounds, which is the largest medical need, and we estimate that there are at least 1 million patients that carry wounds of a large size, larger than 10 square centimeters. So in brief, our business strategy is, if we look at the scar prevention program, that is to develop a product that can facilitate or reduce the formation of scarring on the skin. We changed a little bit our strategic focus in 2021, so earlier this year, where we shifted from previously having worked on type of scars that work within the tissues to scars on the skin. And we are in the preparation stage of a clinical trial, a phase 2 clinical trial that we refer to as PHSU05, that I will tell you a little bit more about in a moment. In parallel with this work, we're also exploring possibilities for strategic partnerships to be able to promote and further develop this technology that we see as a platform technology. In the other program, the one in chronic wounds, we have completed 2 clinical studies, and the most recent clinical study was completed at the end of last year. And here we got strong positive results in a subgroup of patients. As I mentioned before, those patients that particularly have large wounds seem to be preferentially responsive to this treatment. What we're working on now is to enhance our product. We have previously in our clinical studies worked with a 2-component product, and we're now aiming to develop a single component product that can be applied directly without premixing at each administration event. And also in this program, we are exploring the possibilities of finding partnerships to develop this further. Short snapshot of these 2 markets that both are gigantic. If we look at the scarring market, it's estimated at $25 billion with a very high growth rate. We think that 10% or more of all surgical procedures that are conducted annually, that's 300 million plus, are addressable with the product based on this. So we deem that about 40% of this marketplace is an addressable market for a future product based on Ensereptide. On the chronic wound side, as I mentioned, we estimate that there's 1 million patients on the traditional markets that have large wounds. There's substantially more patients that have VLUs, but the large wounds, which it's considered the largest medical need, that represents an addressable market of in the order of $3 billion. I will talk a little bit about the skin scarring program because that's where we invest the majority of our attention and resources at this point in time, and have done so far in the first half of this year. First, want to give you a little bit of background. We work with prevention of so-called fibroblastic scarring, and this is a type of scarring that occurs essentially in a similar fashion with similar biological mechanism, irrespective of where it happens in the body, whether that is on the skin or in a tissue. So I want to point out the fact that we have done prior clinical work, for instance, at scars that occur in conjunction with tendon injuries, and we have obtained positive signals of efficacy there, and that makes us convinced that this general mechanism of action can be addressed with Ensereptide. So we feel quite encouraged to embark on this project on skin scarring, which is a very large market based on our prior signals of positive efficacy that we've seen in scarring in tissues, so to speak. So there's a cross-validation between these programs that validates the mechanism of action of Ensereptide. A little bit about the product concept. So Ensereptide, the active ingredient, is a naturally occurring peptide. It's a fragment of protein lactoferricin, which is a naturally occurring protein, and this has two principal mechanisms of action. It's an anti-inflammatory action that differs from the one that you see with, for instance, steroids, and it's a pro-fibrinolytic action, and these two actions are considered to be the cornerstone in the formation of fibroblastic scarring. The product consists of a kit that has pre-filled syringes with the viscous carrier, the solution, which is hyaluronic acid, and a syringe with the peptide solution, with the Ensereptide solution. And it's worth pointing out that we believe we have exceptionally good safety of this because it's a single administration event. It's a low dose that is applied in the target tissue at a relatively low concentration. The peptide, the active ingredient, is very quickly inactivated in the bloodstream, so the risk for systemic adverse events is very low. In the second quarter, we secured an agreement with the Italian manufacturing company Fidia, and we are very excited about this because for several years we have been struggling with a number of challenges. Challenge number one is that there are globally few suppliers of the kind of high molecular weight hyaluronic acid, highly viscous hyaluronic acid that we require for our product. So there's a very few suppliers that can provide this. Furthermore, these highly viscous solutions are very difficult to dispense in small volumes, so there's very few manufacturers that actually have the capability of doing this at the appropriate quality. The third challenge is that the product sterilization is complicated because standardized procedures such as X-ray or gamma irradiation is not feasible. Standard cycles for autoclavation is not feasible, so it's a very delicate process. And thirdly, or fourthly, we are looking at the problem of scaling. There are a few suppliers that can do this at research scale, but relatively few that can bring this up to a relevant commercial scale. So we are really excited about the fact that we've been able to enter this agreement with Fidia Pharmaceutica, which is an Italian company that can solve all these four problems. Fidia has quality certifications in a number of markets, so not only the European Union, but in all the markets that would be our future commercial markets. And they can handle the scale from the scale that we require in the coming clinical trial all the way up to any commercial scale that we need. So for us, this was really groundbreaking to find one supplier that could solve all these problems in one shot. for us. And we signed an agreement with them in April, and we have started working with the production process for a coming clinical trial. The clinical trial that we're planning to do is PHSU05. This is a relatively small phase 2 study that we're planning to do. We're aiming to include 24 patients. These are healthy volunteers that will receive synthetic wounds on the upper arms. The study protocol includes 5 visits, and at visit 2, these patients will obtain these synthetic wounds and have the product administered. And then we follow these patients in 3 follow-up visits, where the last visit is 3 months after the drug administration. And our objective is to have at least 20 out of these 24 patients completing this protocol. And one of the neat things about the setup that we have here is that each patient will receive 6 surgical incisions, and these 6 wounds will be randomized to receive either treatment with placebo or active drug. This means that each patient can serve as its own control, so that helps us to reduce the variance that otherwise is a big problem when it comes to studies in, for instance, scar prevention. Our objective is to start the patient enrollment in the first quarter of the coming year. We are right now preparing the regulatory file and working on the manufacturing of the study drug. We aim to have completed the study phase on patients in the 3rd quarter, so have the last patient last visit in the beginning of the 3rd quarter. And then after completing the study and the harvesting of the samples, we're going to have a histological analysis of these samples, and that process is still a little bit insecure, or it's uncertain in time when it can be done. We are currently negotiating the terms with a couple of service providers for that process, but our aim is to have completed this trial and have a final study report before the end of next year. So with that as a summary, I want to turn it over to my colleague Erik that will guide you through the quarter 2 position. Erik.
Thank you. I'll do it like this. First of all, the rights issue that we did in June, as you might have seen and read, 89%, a bit more, was subscribed without underwriting, i.e. only 10.8% was subscribed with underwriting. The gross proceeds were 48.6 and the net 45 million, which means that the costs amounted to 7.4% of the total amount, which we believe is a very good number. The net proceeds were transferred in July after the Q2 closing. That means that the cash flow analysis in Q2 looks a bit strange in terms of on each row. Looking at the ownership before and after this transaction, if you look at the right hand side, you see that the large green part of the bar, which is Pharma Research Company, they did not participate in this new issue, and that means that other shareholders were able to enter. So we have, first of all, we have a number of Daniel Jonsson, Executive Allocation, and Arne Persson have mainly taken their share, which means that we have a more balanced ownership among the top 5 and 6 shareholders in the company, which we believe is a very good direction. And funds through Q1 23, that is what we say, at least, I should say. I think we have the possibility to have a bit more than that. What we're going to do then is the phase 2 study of skin scarring by H2 22. We have the product development of Ropocamptide that Jonas has talked about, acquisition of drug components. There are quite some long lead times for the production of peptides. That means that we want to be ahead in time to make those acquisitions. We are performing business development, as Jonas said, and that is more or less to find partners and we're also planning for subsequent steps during this period of time. If we look then at the operating expenses for this quarter, we were at 7.8 million compared to 6.6 in the same quarter last year. We have now started to prepare for the PHSU05 study, and that means that we have made some acquisitions of investigational medical product. That is the main reason why there is an increase between the two quarters. That is very much in line with our new strategy. Otherwise, costs are very evenly, not any major changes from the same quarter last year. If we look at the cash flow, then we started with 18.6 million as a cash balance in the quarter. We had the operating loss of 7.8, and then we have a change in working capital of plus 2.4, which means that we have 13.1 million at the end of the quarter, i.e. a net cash flow of minus 5.5. And then to that we will add the 45 million that were transferred in July. So again, the rights issue, we believe that we have money at least through Q1 23.
All right, so to summarize, and for those of you that have followed us, we are a company, we're addressing indications where there today are no prescription pharmaceuticals, areas characterized by high unmet medical need. If we take the chronic wound field, there are millions of patients that go with wounds that have long duration, and it accounts for a significant part of the global healthcare budget. And in regards to scarring, it's an area where there are today no products available to prevent the occurring of disfiguring scars. We work with areas that are growing rapidly. If we take the scar prevention area, for instance, that is forecasted to grow 9, 10, 11% over the next decade. We have a technology that is validated. We have a patent portfolio in both of these projects. It's covered by several patents, and we have a runway that goes beyond the 2030s or far into the 2030s. And finally, we have a technology that we deem to be very safe. So the likelihood that we will fail in pivotal studies because of safety is deemed to be low, and we have significant opportunities to expand into adjacent indications. In the case of scarring, there are multiple forms of scarring, not only on the skin, but tissue adhesions, for instance. And in terms of chronic wounds, it's not only venous leg ulcers, but we deem that the same technology could apply, for instance, for diabetic foot ulcers. So we think that we have a unique and compelling and strong value proposition in Promore Pharma. So with that, I want to thank for this presentation and turn it back to you, Alf, for any questions or comments from you or the audience.
Thank you very much, Johan and Erik, for that initial presentation. And as Jonas said, we will open up for questions. I will repeat for those who went with us in the beginning that you can write your questions on this platform. You find a heading that says questions in your controls. It might be indicated with the talk bubble, and you can write your questions there and we will read them out. But just to kick it off, I received a question from one of the listeners beforehand on email. And the question is how or whether you are involved in discussions with other partners in the market about licensing or commercial cooperations to take your projects to market. How is that that market at the moment? Is it still that the big players are a little bit held back by COVID and economic considerations, or are discussions ongoing in general?
Thank you for that question. So there are a couple of comments I can make on that. We are consistently in discussions with other companies on potential strategic setups. that is a standard thing for a small biotech company like us. There's a constant discussion with bigger companies. To secure a deal can typically take a quite long time, so you need to have ongoing dialogue, sometimes for years before you secure it. I don't feel that the COVID epidemic per se has held back any of these, other than it's been more difficult to meet live with the business representatives from these companies. But the cash position of these companies, I don't feel has materially changed because of the epidemic. So the interest for new product opportunities remain strong. What I can say is that we are developing pharmaceuticals, and we are having a several tiered scale of how we approach companies. We of course primarily seek partnerships with companies that have experience of working with pharmaceuticals, but we are increasingly also talking to companies that develop medical device type of products, because those type of companies are experiencing a larger hurdle in terms of current medical device regulations that is approaching the same type of regulatory demands that you see for certain types of pharmaceuticals. I cannot comment on the stages that we are on these, or the specific terms that we may or may not be discussing about, but we do have ongoing dialogues.
Okay, thanks. And I noticed also in your report that was released today that you talk about a third-party review of the Ropocamptide project. Now, is there any part of the project in particular that is under review, or that you want to explore?
No, but it's valuable for a product development company like us to sometimes get a third party or an outside perception or analysis of the quality of what we have done. So that's feedback that is useful and helpful when we are in discussions with other companies, for instance, because they typically want to see that it's not only our investigators that love these programs, but that there actually is support from other experts in the field in this. We're also preparing a peer review article, and we hope to have that accepted for publication in the not too far future.
Okay, but so the third-party review of the project that you mentioned, it's on the clinical merits and the clinical result of the study is not a review of market opportunities.
No, thanks, I understand. So no, to clarify, this is a review of the clinical trial data that we obtained from the HEAL LL37 study, the phase 2b study that we concluded at the end of last year.
Okay, and the publication that you mentioned, is it? Can you say anything about what the time scale is before you can expect a publication, and what sort of publication? And also, I mean, what do you see as the main benefit for your company of having a publication out?
Well, there are several advantages of obtaining a published article. I cannot comment on the timeline because it's a multi-tiered approach. But the value for us is that it allows us to present more detailed clinical trial data to the public, and it's a validation because it's reviewed by peers and accepted, and it allows us to have a more detailed discussion with potential companies that we're engaged with on a non-confidential basis. Okay.
Now it's from time to time you hear of competing projects that are also targeting hard to heal wounds. Have you noticed any particular projects that you feel are competitors, or that maybe be something that will compete with you in your discussions with potential partners?
Let me put it this way: considering the huge market opportunity and the huge medical need, there is surprisingly few competitive projects. There are a few other projects that are at phase 2 stage like us, and I would actually welcome that a few of those projects would be successfully reaching the market, because it's an advantage not to be alone in the process of market access. So I think there is room for a number of products without eroding the possibilities for a company like us. What I can say is I think we're quite uniquely positioned in terms of potentially addressing large wounds in venous leg ulcers. So there it seems like we have a niche where I at least haven't seen any other technology that seems to outperform what we think we can accomplish.
Okay. And turning the attention to Ensereptide, I noticed in your presentation you have agreed to run the study, the phase 2 study in Uppsala. What remaining steps are there before the study can kick off? Have you, for instance, agreed with the persons involved in running the study?
Yes, we have a study organization in place. We are manufacturing the experimental product. That's actually a large undertaking. As I mentioned, with Fidia, we have started and almost completed the production of the sterile syringes with a solvent, with the hyaluronic acid. And we are performing according to plan in terms of that production. We are aiming to turn in the clinical trial application this fall. And the main objective for us is, as we have communicated before, to be able to start the dosing of patients in the first quarter of the coming year.
Okay, great, thanks. As for the structure of the actual study, you mentioned that each patient will constitute their own controls because you tend to administer placebo and active ingredient on I think you've said before, separate sides of the customer's body. Is this completely risk-free, or is there a risk that the active ingredient can actually move around the body and enter the placebo side of the body? I know. I mean, I remember reading about the case where they had the same kind of study design between the two eyes, and they discovered later on that there was a surprising ability of the active ingredient to actually migrate between the eyes. Is this a risk that you are considering at all?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. PXL01 or Ensereptide have an extremely low stability in the bloodstream. So for that to work, it would need to be carried by the blood from one side to the other. And what I can say is that in prior clinical trials, we have attempted to estimate the concentration of Ensereptide in the bloodstream after subcutaneous administration, and the levels are non-quantifiable. So there might be a theoretical leakage, but the concentration are so small that we deem that they are way below the range where they would have a therapeutic action. So this is a local treatment. It's held at the local spot by the high viscous hyaluronic acid, and any small amount that may leak into the bloodstream will immediately be broken down, and that is supported by our prior pharmacokinetic studies.
Okay, thanks for that. Let's see, I have received a question here from the audience about the upcoming PHSU study on healthy individuals. Are they known to evolve hypertrophic scars, or are they completely healthy patients?
These will be completely healthy patients, but even completely healthy patients can develop certain level of hypertrophy. It's actually more common than not that you get a certain level of hypertrophic scar formation in a wound than not. But there is an individual variation in how this happens, and it's for that reason it's very valuable for us to be able to utilize the patients at their own controls.
Okay. I repeat that you can ask questions. You can use the controls that is labeled questions, or potentially with a question mark. But we are nearing the end of this, so you have to type fast. In the meantime, I have just one more question about Ensereptide. You have chosen to focus on scars from surgical procedures, and so as far as I know, you have excluded more acute wounds on treatment in emergency rooms. Are there biological differences between those two types of wounds that have supported this decision?
We think that the type of wounds that we will be studying in this clinical trial will be very similar because these are full thickness wounds. So they are similar to the type of surgical wounds that you would get in a surgical procedure. The reason that we've decided to work on healthy volunteers is that we can make the wounds very precise in size, and we can put them at a location that is very precise. For instance, the spacing between them, and we can make them similar on each individual. So it gives us a chance to, under very controlled statistical, in a controlled statistical setting, make the comparison between active and placebo. So it gives us a chance to really validate the effectiveness of the drug. If this is positive, then of course we would go into next set of clinical studies that would evolve or assess the efficacy of Ensereptide in typical surgical wounds, but that would give a larger spread or larger variance in the nature of the wound, the location of the wound, the size, etc. So this is a way to make a very well-controlled study, but the type of wounds would have high relevance for the type of wounds that you would see in any type of surgery, essentially.
Okay. Well, my question is also, further down the line, would it be thinkable that you would address a market for more acute or accidental wounds? Is it the same kind of healing that will occur in a natural occurring wound from a surgical wound?
Yes, that would be within our scope.
All right, great.
And we believe that there's high similarities.
All right. Right, I don't have any more questions, and I can't see that we have any more questions from the audience. So I think that's just about what we will cover today. Do you want to have a closing remark, Jonas or Erik?
No, I think that's it for Promore Pharma today. I want to thank you all for logging in, and anyone who watches the film recording of this, and thank you for your attention to our company.
Thank you, and also thank you to the audience from me. So hopefully we see each other in another quarter's time.
Thank you, Alf.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.